Deep in the dark tunnels of Middle-earth's misty mountains, a legend looms large. The real story of Azog the Defiler. But who was the real Azog, and how does his true story differ from the one told in the movies? Was Azog truly the feared orc chieftain of legend, or is there more to his story than meets the eye? Well, to know this all, you have to stay tuned till the end. Long ago, before Moria became the dwelling of orcs, it was known by another name, Khazad-dûm. This was the greatest mansion of the dwarves, a place of great wealth and prosperity. The dwarves called it Dwarrodelf, while the elves knew it as Hadhundrond. It was a realm bathed in golden prosperity, thanks largely to its most precious resource, mithril. Mithril was unlike any other metal. It shimmered like silver, but was stronger than steel. The dwarves could fashion it into armor and weapons of unparalleled quality. They mined it from deep within the earth, where veins of mithril flowed like liquid silver, promising riches beyond measure. In their pursuit of mithril, the dwarves delved deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountains. But their greed would prove their undoing. In the year 1980 of the Third Age, they awakened a terrible evil, one of Morgoth's Balrogs. This ancient creature, with its unyielding fury, laid waste to everything in its path, including Durin VI, the king of Khazad-dûm. The dwarves named it Durin's Bane. The dwarves delved deep at that time, seeking beneath Barinzapar for mithril, the metal beyond price that was becoming yearly ever harder to win. Thus they roused from sleep a thing of terror that, flying from Thangorodrim, had lain hidden at the fountains of the earth since the coming of the host of the West, a Balrog of Morgoth. In the aftermath of this tragedy, the dwarves were left without leaders and haunted by the shadow of the Balrog. They fled their ancestral hells, leaving behind a land shrouded in darkness. Khazad-dûm was no more. It would be known as Moria from then on, a name that meant the Black Chasm or the Black Pit in the Elvish tongue. At 4 centuries, Moria lay silent and still, its once great halls empty and abandoned. But the memory of its past glory and the horrors that had befallen it lingered like a dark cloud over the land. As time passed, Moria became little more than a legend, a cautionary tale whispered by travelers and adventurers. Some claim to have seen strange lights flickering in the darkness, or heard the echoes of distant voices drifting up from the depths. But few dared to venture into the depths of Moria, for fear of awakening the ancient evil that lurked there. And so, Moria remained a place of mystery and dread, its secrets hidden beneath the earth, waiting to be discovered by those brave enough to seek them out. In the year 2480 of the Third Age, Sauron, driven by his insatiable desire for mithril, made a fateful decision. He chose to send his legions of orcs into the cavernous depths of Moria, the ancient underground kingdom once known as Khazad-dûm. This realm had long been abandoned by the dwarves after the awakening of the Balrog, Durin's Bane. Sauron, who resided in Dol Guldur across the river in southern Mirkwood, was well aware of the Balrog's presence and the turmoil it had caused. From his dark fortress, he sensed the fear and unrest that gripped Moria as the dwarves fled and the elves of Lothlorien abandoned their woodland sanctuary. Knowing the Balrog's power and perhaps calculating that the creature would tolerate the orcs, Sauron sent them into Moria to secure the precious mithril. Despite the risks of many orcs perishing, the potential rewards of retrieving the valuable metal were deemed worthwhile. Thus, Moria became home to Sauron's minions, and the dominion of the orcs of Moria began. It was during this dark and turbulent time that Azog, a fearsome orc chieftain, rose to prominence. Born and bred in the shadowy depths of Moria, Azog became a symbol of terror and brutality. His name spread fear throughout the region as he led countless raids, expanding Orc territory and consolidating his power. For nearly 3 centuries, Moria remained under Orc rule. The once majestic halls of Khazad-dûm were now shrouded in darkness, echoing with the sounds of Orcish cruelty and the clinking of mining tools in pursuit of mithril. The Orcs established their strongholds deep within the mines, expanding their dominion and mining operations. Despite the Orcs' oppressive rule, there were pockets of resistance. Dwarves and elves who had fled Moria and Mirkwood formed alliances, launching daring attacks on the Orc strongholds in hopes of weakening their hold on the region. These efforts were met with fierce resistance, and the battles within Moria's dark tunnels and chambers were relentless. Yet the spirit of resistance persisted. The dwarves, in particular, held on to the hope of reclaiming their lost kingdom of Khazad-dûm. They believed in the return of Durin's folk to their ancestral home and fought bravely to resist the Orcish tyranny. As time passed, the struggle in Moria continued. Lives were lost on both sides as battles raged on. Despite the hardships, the dwarves and their allies did not falter in their determination to one day free Moria from Orcish control. Meanwhile, Sauron observed from afar, satisfied with the Orcs occupying Moria and exploiting its resources. Mithril was a valuable asset in his plans for domination over Middle-earth, and he watched closely as the Orcs continued to delve deeper into the mines. Throughout the centuries, Moria remained a place of darkness and fear. Azog's rule grew more tyrannical, and his Orc armies became more numerous and ruthless. They plundered the riches of Khazad-dûm, desecrating its once glorious halls. However, unknown to Azog and Sauron, a new fellowship was forming in distant lands. Composed of diverse peoples from across Middle-earth, this fellowship carried the hope of restoring peace to the region. They sought to challenge the darkness that had engulfed Moria and to reclaim the kingdom of Khazad-dûm for its rightful heirs. And so the stage was set for a climactic struggle, a battle between light and darkness, good and evil, in the heart of Moria. For many years, the Orcs of Moria lived undisturbed in the dark, abandoned halls of Khazad-dûm. However, in the year 2770 of the Third Age, a series of events in the east forced the dwarves to take action. The dragon Smaug attacked Erebor, the Lonely Mountain, driving out King Thrór and his people. Smaug, a mighty, fire-breathing dragon, had heard rumors of the immense wealth of Erebor and desired it for himself. Without warning, he descended upon Erebor in flames, destroying the kingdom and laying waste to the nearby town of Dale. Smaug took residence in the Great Hall, where he slept upon a bed of gold and treasures. Thrór and his kin escaped the destruction, finding refuge in Dunland. For years, they lived under the shadow of the Misty Mountains, but the longing to reclaim their lost kingdom never left their hearts. 20 years after being driven from Erebor, King Thrór made a bold and fateful decision. Accompanied only by his loyal companion, Gnar, Thrór set out on a journey to Moria, the ancient dwarven kingdom now infested with Orcs. One might wonder why Thrór would take such a dangerous path. Perhaps the despair and shame of losing his kingdom weighed too heavily upon him, or maybe he sought vengeance against the dark forces that had taken everything from him. But there is also the possibility that Thór's ring of power, influenced by the return of Sauron, was exerting its will over him. When Thrór arrived at Moria, the gates were ominously open. Gnar begged him to be cautious, but Thrór, proud and determined, walked into Moria as if reclaiming his rightful throne. Tragically, he did not return. Gnar, hiding nearby, waited for days. One day he heard a loud shout and the sound of a horn. To his horror, he saw a body thrown out into the steppes of Moria. Fearing it was Thrór, Gnar crept closer. From within the gate, a mocking voice called out to him. The voice belonged to Azog, an Orc chieftain who had taken control of Moria. Azog had killed Thrór and now claimed dominion over the halls of Khazad-dûm. Thor's body lay headless, with a severed head lying face down. Gnar turned the head over and saw the name Azog, branded in dwarf runes, on Thor's brow. Azog's laughter echoed in the shadows as he proclaimed himself the master of Moria. Gnar fled back to Dunland with the grim news. The once proud king under the mountain, heir of Durin, had met a gruesome end at the hands of Azog. The dwarves were consumed by grief and rage. This brutal act of violence and desecration could not go unanswered. The death of Thrór sparked a fierce desire for revenge among the dwarves. They vowed to avenge their fallen king and reclaim their ancestral home from the Orcs. Led by Thór's son, Thrain II, the dwarves prepared for war. They gathered their armies, forged weapons, and trained relentlessly for the battles ahead. Thus began the War of the Dwarves and Orcs, one of the most brutal conflicts of the Third Age. The dwarves, driven by their thirst for vengeance and the memory of their fallen king, fought with unparalleled ferocity. The war culminated in the Battle of Azanulbizar, a fierce confrontation between the dwarves and the orc armies led by Azog. At Azanulbizar, the dwarves fought valiantly, determined to reclaim Khazad-dûm and avenge Thór's death. The battle was intense, with neither side willing to yield. In the end, it was Thorin Oakenshield, Thór's grandson, who confronted Azog in a final brutal duel. Wielding his father's legendary axe, Thorin dealt a fatal blow to Azog, securing a decisive victory for the dwarves. With Azog defeated, the dwarves reclaimed Khazad-dûm, though it lay in ruins. The victory came at a high cost, but the dwarves had proven their resilience and determination. The scars of the war would linger, but the memory of their fallen king, Thrór, and the bravery of those who fought for vengeance and honor would be remembered for generations. The dwarves continued their quest to rebuild Erebor and Khazad-dûm, striving to restore their former glory. Gnar, the king's sole companion, returned with the heartbreaking news of Thór's tragic end. He told Thór's son, Thrain, about the cruel fate his father had met in the hands of Azog. The grief weighed heavily on Thrain for 7 sleepless nights. Finally, he could bear it no longer and declared, "This cannot be borne." Azog's insult against the heir of Durin was too great to ignore, and Thrain sent word to his kin and called them all to war. Many answered his call, coming from the houses of the other fathers. In the year 2793 of the Third Age, the War of the Dwarves and Orcs began. The massive dwarven army, driven by the need for vengeance, attacked every orc hold they could find. They swept through the mountain range and deep into the caves of the Misty Mountains, killing their enemies with unmatched fury. For 6 long years, the cries of orcs echoed through the deep places under the mountains. The dwarves assailed and destroyed every stronghold of the orcs they could find, from Gundabad to the Gladden. Both sides were ruthless, and there was death and cruelty by day and by night. But the dwarves prevailed because of their strength, their superior weapons, and the fire of their anger. They hunted for Azog in every den under the mountain. At last, the dwarven host reached the eastern entrance of Moria. They entered Dimriel Dale for a final decisive battle. Here, the fate of the war would be determined. The Battle of Azanulbizar was a fierce and decisive clash in the long war between the dwarves and the orcs. It began with the determined warriors of Nan, son of Thrór, breaking through the orc ranks all the way to the gates of Moria. Shouting "Azog, Azog," they cut down anyone who stood in their way. Nan himself stood before the gate and called out in a loud voice, "Azog, if you're in there, come out, or is the fight outside too tough for you?" Azog, a massive and formidable orc with an ironclad head, stepped out, accompanied by his elite guard. He taunted Nyan, saying, "Another beggar at my door? Do I need to brand you too?" The two clashed fiercely, but Azog, with a swift and powerful strike, broke Nyan's neck, causing him to fall. Azog laughed and began to yell in triumph, but his cry was cut short. He saw that his forces were being utterly defeated, with dwarves slaughtering orcs everywhere, and the survivors fleeing in panic. Realizing his guard was dead, Azog turned to retreat into the gate. But before he could escape, a dwarf with a red axe, Dayan Ironfoot, son of Naian, leaped after him. Right at the doors of Moria, Dayan caught up with Azog and killed him, cutting off his head. After this hard-fought victory, Thrór declared that Khazad-dûm had been reclaimed, but other dwarven houses refused to lay claim to Durin's kingdom, and Durin's folk themselves were unwilling to enter while the shadow of the Balrog, Durin's bane, still lingered. They took Azog's head, placed a purse of coins in its mouth, and set it on a stake as a grim warning. Thrór then turned to Dayan and asked, "Will my own kin desert me?" Dayan replied, "No. You are the father of our folk, and we have fought and bled for you and will do so again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. I have looked beyond the shadow of the gate, and Durin's bane waits there still. The world must change, and some other power must come before Durin's folk can walk in Moria again." Despite their victory, the dwarves bore the heavy scars of battle. Their numbers were greatly reduced, and the toll of the war was evident. However, they had finally ended Azog's reign of terror under the mountains. The death of Azog brought a sense of closure to the dwarves. Though they had reclaimed some honor and avenged their fallen kin, the shadow of Moria still loomed large. The Balrog remained a powerful and ancient evil that they could not yet overcome. The dwarves knew that their time in Moria would come again, but it was not yet. For now, they had to be content with their victory, and the knowledge that they had struck a significant blow against their enemies. The war had taken a heavy toll, but it had also shown the strength and resilience of the dwarves. Their unity and determination had carried them through the darkest times. They would rebuild and recover, always keeping the memory of their fallen heroes alive. The legacy of Naian, Thrór, and the countless others who fought and died in the battle would endure, inspiring future generations to strive for the greatness that once was and would be again. The story we've shared is the original version of events from Tolkien's writings, which differ significantly from Peter Jackson's portrayal of Azog in the Hobbit film trilogy. In the movies, Azog's fate takes a different path. During the Battle of Azanulbizar, Azog doesn't die at the hands of Dayan Ironfoot. Instead, Thorin Oakenshield sees his grandfather's severed head held aloft by Azog, and in a rage attacks the Great Orc, managing to cut off part of his arm. Wounded, Azog is dragged back into the mines by his followers and survives to become the main villain of the trilogy. In Jackson's films, Azog is depicted as a towering figure, a massive presence among the orcs, overshadowing all others. His enormous stature is second only to that of his equally formidable son Bolg. However, Tolkien's depiction of Azog is slightly different. Described as a great orc with a huge ironclad head, Azog is undoubtedly fearsome, but his size is exaggerated in the movies. Tolkien provides few details about the exact size of his orcs. In the battle within the chamber of Mazarbul, he describes a huge orc chieftain who is almost man-high, clad in black mail. This huge orc is still shorter than a man, suggesting that Tolkien's orcs were generally around 4 to 5 feet tall, possibly smaller for some. Given this information, it's likely that Azog, described as a great orc, was probably under 6 feet tall. The film's titles, Azog the Defiler and The Pale Orc, were created for the movies. Tolkien, known for his sparse character descriptions, leaves Azog's appearance largely to the reader's imagination, and doesn't mention him being pale. The pale skin and nickname are likely added to make Azog stand out and be more memorable to film audiences, differentiating him from other orcs. The title, Defiler, isn't found in Tolkien's writings, but it suits Azog's character well. He defiled Thrór's body, marking his brow and dismembering him. In the desolation of Smaug, Bolg tells Azog that the Master has summoned him, a plotline created for the films. In Tolkien's original story, Azog is a fierce warrior and a formidable enemy. His encounter with Naian and his subsequent death at the hands of Dayan Ironfoot are crucial moments in the dwarves' struggle against the orcs. The films, however, take creative liberties, expanding Azog's role and changing key events to create a more visually dramatic and continuous antagonist for the trilogy. Ultimately, both versions of Azog's story contribute to the rich tapestry of Middle-earth, blending Tolkien's literary legacy with modern cinematic storytelling. Whether on the page or on the screen, the Azog remains a symbol of the enduring conflict between the dwarves and the orcs, a testament to the bravery and resilience of those who fight against darkness. In Peter Jackson's The Hobbit film trilogy, Azog's story diverges significantly from Tolkien's original tale. In the movies, Azog travels to Dol Guldur, where it's revealed that he reports directly to the Dark Lord Sauron, disguised as the Necromancer. However, in the books, there is no evidence of any direct relationship between Sauron and Azog. According to the appendices, Sauron begins to populate Moria with his creatures in the year 2480, but Azog's name isn't mentioned until 2790, 310 years later. Given that orcs are generally short-lived, it seems unlikely that Azog ever met Sauron. Tolkien's writing suggests that orcs originate from corrupted elves, leading to the misconception that they are immortal or have long lifespans. In reality, orcs have a relatively short life expectancy. They can be killed, suffer from diseases, and die naturally. The Edain, who age similarly to other men, live between 70 and 90 years, a long lifespan given their limited medical knowledge. Thus, orcs likely live around 60 years, assuming they don't succumb to illness or injury. Considering Azog's formidable presence during the Battle of Azanulbizar, he was probably not an old orc, making it unlikely that he ever met Sauron. In the original story, Azog is a powerful warrior. He encounters Nyan and is ultimately killed by Dain Ironfoot. But in Jackson's films, Azog's fate changes. During the Battle of Azanulbizar, Thorin Oakenshield sees his grandfather's severed head held by Azog and attacks him in a rage, managing to cut off part of Azog's arm. Azog is then dragged back into the mines by his followers and survives to become the main antagonist of the trilogy. In the movies, Azog's depicted as a towering, massive figure overshadowing all other orcs and rivaled only by his son Bolg. Tolkien's depiction of Azog, however, is slightly different. Described as a great orc with a huge ironclad head, Azog is undoubtedly fearsome, but his size is exaggerated in the movies. See in The Hobbit, Bolg, Azog's son, led the Battle of Five Armies, which happened 150 years after his supposed lifespan would allow. So, how could he do that? Well, that's the question. It turns out Bolg and Azog might have been different from regular orcs, maybe some other type or a rare kind. Melkor, the big bad, had a bunch of helpers called Malar. They could change forms just like him, and they messed with the very first elves, the Quindai. Before the Valar even started fighting Melkor, these elves were already feeling spooked out. Creepy shapes were lurking around their homes, and some of them disappeared and were never seen again. Some of these things were probably just tricks or weird thoughts, but some were definitely the Maiar, servants of Melkor, making fun of and messing with the forms of these children. Well, some folks think that Azog and Bolg might not have been your run-of-the-mill orcs. They could have been something called the Bulldogs. These Bulldogs were basically big, scary demons who used to be Maiar, tempted into serving the ultimate bad guy Melkor. While you've probably heard of Balrogs, who were also fallen Maiar, Bulldogs were a bit different. Instead of being fire demons like Balrogs, Bulldogs seemed to prefer taking the form of massive and terrifying orcs. See, Melkor had a bunch of powerful servants, some of them so old and strong they were practically immortal. These evil spirits, just like Melkor, could change their shapes and often appeared as these huge, intimidating orc leaders. During the big War of the Jewels, a whole bunch of these lesser Maiar, who were loyal to Melkor, started calling themselves Bulldogs. Now, not all of them were super tough. Some were only a bit stronger than a really tough mortal. That's why it's not so crazy to think that a legendary dwarf warrior like Dain could take one down in a fight. Tolkien himself even wrote about one Bulldog in Morgoth's Ring, where he tells us about a tough orc captain named Bulldog, who led raids against the elves. In one story, Bulldog faces off against the elven king, Thingol, and despite putting up a fierce fight, he ends up getting taken out. Now let's explore the intriguing lineage of Azog and Bolg, descendants of the powerful beings known as bulldogs, a unique breed that blended the ancient power of Maiar with the brutality of Orcs. Bulldogs were not merely a name, they represented a whole category of creatures. Orc-shaped Maiar, although not as formidable as Balrogs. These Maiar, once mighty spirits, fell under the sway of Melkor, the first Dark Lord. They chose to manifest as gigantic and fearsome orcs, forsaking their original forms for ones more suited to war and domination. But how could beings as powerful as Azog meet their end? It's a fair question. The Maiar, despite their incredible strength, were not immortal in the same way as the Valar. They could be defeated, their physical forms destroyed. We've seen this happen with Balrogs and even with Sauron himself, who faced defeat multiple times. The mystery lies in Azog's story. Unlike some Maiar, there's no record of him returning after his apparent demise. Maybe he couldn't pull himself together again, or perhaps he did return in secret, hiding his true identity. Another intriguing possibility is that Azog was a mix of different races, a blend of bulldog and a regular orc. Imagine that, a creature with the power of a fallen angel and the brutality of an orc. It's a compelling thought. In essence, Azog and Bolg were far from average orcs. They were something much more ancient and powerful, with a lineage stretching back to the darkest days of Middle-earth. This lineage traces back to a curious union, a mingling of bulldog and orc. Bulldogs, as you might recall, were once Maiar, powerful spirits who fell under Melkor's influence and took the form of great and terrible orcs. According to the tales, even the least of the Maiar could become orcs. Before the fall of Utumno, Melkor corrupted many spirits, some greater like Sauron, or lesser like Balrogs. The weakest among them might have transformed into primitive yet immensely powerful orcs. Over time, their embodied existence and procreation, they became more tethered to the earthly realm, unable to return to their former spirit state, or even their original demon form. Only death could release them, and even then, they lingered as diminished spirits, filled with hate, but lacking the physical power to act effectively. They were like poltergeists, haunting the world they once sought to conquer. The theories surrounding Azog and Bolg's lineage are quite plausible in this context. They suggest that these two formidable beings were the offspring of such a curious union between bulldog and orc. As generations passed, their descendants seemed to become increasingly bound to the mortal world through their continued procreation. This divine lineage likely granted them their formidable strength and extended their lifespans far beyond that of a regular orc. It is possible that their bloodline made them more than just orcish leaders. It made them legends, warriors of immense stature and cunning. Their history may have been storied, a tale of battles fought and won in the name of darkness. But their story is even more intriguing. The race of bulldogs was not simply a single being, but a species in its own right. A species that chose to serve the Dark Lord and wreak havoc upon the world. In Tolkien's vast legendarium, the true span of Azog's life remains veiled in uncertainty. We can speculate that he might have served as a trusted commander alongside Sauron in ages past. Perhaps Azog was tasked by the Dark Lord himself to populate the depths of Moria with his minions. Azog's story invites us to imagine the possibilities hidden within his shadowy past, reminding us of the depth and richness of Tolkien's creation. His existence remains a subject of speculation and wonder, urging us to explore the realms of Middle-earth, where legends are born and history is made. Legends also suggest that powerful orc lords, survivors of the fall of Angband, rose to prominence under Sauron's rule. These great orc chieftains are said to have vanished into shadows, re-emerging across time. So what do you think? Could Azog have fought as a captain under Morgoth, or commanded orcs during the War of the Last Alliance? Have you ever heard this hidden side of the story anywhere? What are your views on this? I would love to know. Make sure you comment down below and let us know your thoughts. And also, please mention your favorite character from this whole story, and share this video if you would with your friends and family and fellow fans of all things Tolkien. and all those who still believe in the myths of this story. So, don't you want more stories to be revealed? Well, for that, we ask you kindly to please subscribe to our channel. Make sure you press the bell icon, and that will allow you to always be notified of our latest updates right away. Thanks for spending time with us today. Thank you for watching, and keep exploring.